Sebastian had the peculiar habit of collecting silences. While the world around him pulsed with voices and expectations, he preferred the moments when he could hear only his own thoughts. This was how he survived the routine at his father's investment company, where the days were wrapped in numbers and polished phrases that didn't seem like his own. Since losing his mother 3 years earlier, he felt like a piece out of place, fitted into a jigsaw puzzle he never chose to assemble. The relationship with his father was like a poorly built bridge. It bore the weight of the necessary, but there was neither beauty nor solidity. The conversations, rare and short, revolved around results and goals. The emptiness he carried, however, could not be filled by charts or reports. He felt that something inside him was extinguishing each day, like a flame that couldn't find oxygen. It was on a grey afternoon, while looking at the city through his office window, that he decided to change the direction of the wind in his life. Without warning, he took a leave of absence and bought a backpack. There was no fixed destination, just the desire to find something he lost long ago. Himself. After a few weeks of impromptu travels, he arrived at a small coastal town, guided by the smell of salt and the sound of waves. It was the kind of place his mother would have loved to visit, with its quiet streets and boats gently swaying at the dock. That morning, Sebastian decided it was time to disconnect from everything, literally. He left his phone, watch, and even his shoes in his backpack and walked along the beach, feeling the cold sand beneath his feet. The water called to him like an invitation. Without thinking, he ran into the sea and let the icy waves envelop him. For a brief moment, he felt something close to the freedom he so longed for. When he returned to the sand, however, reality hit him like the undertow of the sea. His backpack had disappeared, taking with it his documents, money, and any trace of his former life. Alone, barefoot, and directionless, Sebastian wandered through the city. Then he saw a small restaurant, the entrance just a little door, where a young woman with brown hair tied in a ponytail smiled at the few customers. There was something about that place, and that young woman that made him stop. And unknowingly, his journey was just beginning. Claire, at 25, was the beating heart of that small and simple restaurant, but carried a burden that seemed much heavier than her shoulders should bear. Even before the sunlight touched the windows, she was already in the kitchen, preparing fresh pasta and organising supplies with almost choreographed precision. Her life was a delicate dance between keeping the business alive and caring for her father, whose health was slipping away like sand through fingers. That afternoon, while stacking trays and casting a worried glance at the almost empty cash register, a stranger crossed the threshold of the restaurant. He was barefoot, with wet clothes clinging to his body, and an expression caught between despair and hope. Claire stopped what she was doing, studying him for a moment. "Lost something?" she asked, her voice carrying more curiosity than suspicion. Sebastian, a bit hesitant, explained his situation. The account was simple, almost dry, but the words bore the weight of something greater. He was left without money, without documents, and without direction. He could have told the truth, that he was the son of a successful businessman who had left home to escape the suffocating life his father had planned for him. But something about that small town, that simple restaurant, and the woman in front of him made him hold back. He didn't want her to see him as just another rich man seeking an adventure to soothe his own guilt. He wanted to be seen for who he really was, or at least for what he was trying to discover within himself. "I am living in the city shelter. I lost everything," he said, his voice sounding lower than he intended. It was a half-truth, but loaded with intention. He had lost everything that mattered to him, his freedom, his identity, the connection with the mother who had always encouraged him to seek life beyond numbers and business. Seeing Claire nod, offering him a warm meal and the chance to work, Sebastian felt a mix of relief and guilt. He knew he should tell the truth, but for now, he preferred to let her see in him what perhaps he himself was still trying to see. Claire crossed her arms, pondering. It wasn't the first time someone had shown up with difficult stories. The world seemed to have an infinite supply of them. But there was something in his eyes. a vulnerability that didn't match the firm demeanor of someone who seemed used to being in control. "You must be hungry," she finally said, without any drama. "I can offer you a meal, if you're willing to work a few hours in the kitchen." Sebastian accepted without a second thought. The relief on his face was almost imperceptible, but Claire noticed. At that moment, he seemed less like a customer and more like a piece that somehow fate had set on her board. In the days that followed, the new helper became a discreet but indispensable presence in the restaurant. Amid the hot steam escaping from the pots and the rhythmic sound of dishes being washed, he observed the owner of the place with growing curiosity. There was something fascinating about the way she moved in that everyday chaos, as if her energy were the only thing keeping everything running. The stove whistled, the phone rang, and, in the midst of it all, she still found time to respond to her father, whose frail voice came from the back room. Working side by side, Sebastian began to unravel the pieces of Claire's life, almost without her noticing. It wasn't just the exhausting routine that shaped her, but the stories hidden in the pauses between one served dish and another. He discovered that after her mother's death, the young woman took on a role no one had asked her to, but which she accepted without hesitation. She raised her younger brother while her father struggled to keep the restaurant afloat. When the time came to choose between her studies and the sustenance of her family, she didn't hesitate. Despite carrying so much, Claire seemed to harbour an untamed flame within her. On a quiet night, as the two cleaned the empty hall, she suddenly stopped and looked at her work companion, as if she had decided he was someone she could trust. "One day, I want to transform this place," said the young woman, her voice low but firm. "Not just survive. I want it to be something I'm proud of. Maybe even build an inn here next door, you know. A space where people feel at home." Sebastian listened without intervening. He wasn't a man of easy words, but at that moment he realised he didn't need them. The sparkle in Claire's eyes was enough to fill the silence between them. It was more than admiration. It was a strange and new feeling, as if he were rediscovering something forgotten. As the days passed, the visitor felt changes he couldn't name. The armour of cynicism and frustration, which he once considered part of who he was, began to crack. There was something transformative in Claire's simplicity, not a naive simplicity, but a strength that turned difficulties into purpose. He began to realise that wealth wasn't what he had left behind, but what he was living there, in that small and meaningful space. The conversations between the two deepened. She shared precious memories, painting portraits of a past that Sebastian could almost touch. The aroma of homemade bread baked by her mother, the starry nights when her father told tales of sailors, and the stolen moments of joy with her younger brother. In turn, he revealed parts of himself, reluctant at first but increasingly at ease. It was as if Claire had a key to unlock doors he hadn't even known were locked. In that small kitchen of a seaside restaurant, Sebastian discovered something he had never learned in his meeting rooms and luxurious travels. Wealth was not in what you owned, but in what you lived. And the young woman lived intensely, even on the toughest days. He was in love with her, in love with seeing the beauty of life once again. One night, after a long day at the restaurant, Claire surprised Sebastian with an unexpected invitation. "You should have dinner with us at home. I want you to meet my father," she said, her eyes lit up by a shy smile. The man felt his heart tighten, torn between the joy of being included in something so intimate and the weight of the lie he carried. Even so, he accepted, wishing for a moment that he could be just the simple man she believed him to be. Claire's house reflected who she was: simple, welcoming, full of small touches that spoke of care. Old photographs on the wall, the smell of fresh spices coming from the kitchen, and a lazy cat curled up on the sofa. Her father waited in an armchair near the window. Despite the evident frailty, there was something about him. A sparkle in his eyes, a firm tone in his voice, that made Sebastian feel small in his presence. During dinner, conversations flowed naturally. The gentleman, with a wisdom that seemed to have been sculpted by time, shared stories and reflections that captured the visitor's attention. "Life is never easy, my young man," he said, watching him intently. "But it's not the burdens that define us, it's the choices we make as we carry them. My daughter is an example of that. She never bows to hardships." The words pierced Sebastian like needles, bringing his guilt to the surface. He looked at Claire, who smiled as she served her father another slice of pie, unaware of the inner conflict he was experiencing. It was painful to be in such a genuine environment while his lie hung over everyone like a shadow. The following days brought a newfound closeness between the two. They began to spend more time together outside the restaurant, walking on the sand at sunset or simply sitting on the pier, listening to the sound of the waves. She, who had always been a fortress of self-control, found in him someone she could trust with her dreams and vulnerabilities. He listened to her with an interest that seemed deeper than mere curiosity, as if he were trying to absorb everything she was. He, in turn, felt transformed. There was something about her. Her quiet strength, her ability to find beauty even in adversity, that disarmed his defences. For the first time, he saw meaning in something that couldn't be bought with money. One afternoon, while sitting on the small staircase that led to the room at the back of the restaurant, the sound of the waves breaking in the distance was the only companion to his thoughts. He ran his fingers distractedly through his hair, while the weight of the lie he had told her suffocated him. "Why didn't I tell the truth?" he thought, staring at the ground as if he could find answers there. Perhaps because for the first time he didn't want to be defined by the last name he carried, nor by the money that had always been his gilded cage. There no one looked at him as the son of a tycoon. She, with those eyes that seemed to read his soul, saw something more, something he himself had forgotten. But how long could he sustain that? The guilt settled in like a growing shadow, threatening to swallow the moments of peace he was beginning to find. In the big city, his father, furious with his prolonged absence, finally discovered his whereabouts. Determined to bring him back to the real world, he drove to the small coastal town. The arrival of the luxurious and gleaming car caused an immediate commotion among the residents. He was helping to close the restaurant when he saw the vehicle park in front. His chest tightened. The man who got out of the car had an imposing presence, but his face was contorted in anger. "Sebastian, what nonsense is this?" shouted the father, his voice sharp enough to silence any conversation around. "Leaving everything behind to play the labourer in a place like this? Have you lost your mind?" Shock took over her. She looked at him, then at the furious man, trying to understand. "What's happening?" she asked, her voice faltering. He tried to speak, but his father didn't give him the chance. "He lied to you, young lady. My son has a life in the big city, full of luxuries and responsibilities that he simply abandoned. Pretending to be poor? What a joke!" The words echoed like gunshots. She took a step back, her gaze wavering between confusion and hurt. "Is it true?" she asked quietly, as if she already knew the answer. He swallowed hard, but the truth was now raw and exposed. He tried to explain, but every word seemed to scratch the heavy silence between them. She shook her head, her eyes shining with tears she refused to let fall. "You had no right," she said, her voice firm despite the tremor, "to pretend to be someone you are not, to make me believe that you shared the same struggle." And then, like the waves crashing against the pier every night, the connection he had felt so deeply began to unravel before him. "Did you lie about everything? Pretended to be in a shelter while there are people truly in need in this city?" he questioned, tears in his eyes. "I trusted you. I opened my life, my home, my heart." He tried to get closer, but she stepped back. "Please, go away. I don't want to see you anymore," she said, turning her back and entering the restaurant. Devastated, he returned to the big city with his father. In the days that followed, he couldn't stop thinking about her and how much he had hurt her. He realized that in his quest for meaning, he ended up causing pain to someone who truly cared about him. After much reflection, he made a decision. He wrote a long letter explaining his reasons, his past, and how she had changed his perspective on life. Along with the letter, he did something concrete. He negotiated with the restaurant's creditors to alleviate her debts, but in a way that respected her autonomy and did not seem like a handout. Months passed. He had returned to work at his father's company, with his heart still with her, but with his mind renewed after some time living that way. One day, while visiting a food fair in a neighbouring town, he spotted a familiar stand. His heart raced as he recognised her, smiling and serving dishes to customers. Her restaurant seemed to finally be thriving. With hesitant steps, he approached. She saw him and for a moment was paralysed. He took a deep breath and spoke. "I know I don't have the right to be here, but I needed to see you. I want to apologise in person for what I did. I understand if you don't want to see me or talk to me, but—" She interrupted him. "I read your letter. Several times, actually." The silence between them was filled with unspoken emotions. Finally, she continued. "What you did hurt me deeply. It took time for me to process everything. But I also can't deny that the moments we spent together were real for me. The feelings I had, that I still have, are true." He felt a spark of hope but knew he needed to be cautious. "I understand. I don't expect you to forgive me or trust me again. I just want you to know that you changed my life in a way I never imagined possible. You taught me the true meaning of strength, courage, and generosity." She looked him in the eyes, searching for sincerity in his words. After a moment, she said, "I can't promise anything. The trust that was broken doesn't rebuild overnight, but maybe we can try again, this time with honesty from the start." A small smile appeared on his lips. It wasn't a happy ending, but it was a new beginning. A beginning based on truth, mutual respect, and the understanding that the deepest connections are born from vulnerability and authenticity. As the sun set over the fair, they walked side by side, speaking softly. The future was uncertain, but both had learned valuable lessons about love, honesty, and the transformative power of a genuine connection. And that in itself was already a new beginning full of possibilities. If you enjoyed the story, please leave a comment with a rating from 1 to 5 to show how much you liked it. Also, watch the video that is now appearing on your screen. See you soon.